The Aryan Republican Army, or ARA for short, was a small four-man, tight-knit Columbus, Ohio-based white nationalist terrorist organization that specialized in takeover-style bank robberies. Situated in the Midwest, the heart of America, the group thrived when it came to these robberies, and had the shared aim of overthrowing the federal government. Their ultimate goal was to bring into place a white supremacist dictatorship in America. Three ambitions were for the ARA to eliminate the government, exterminate the Jewish population of America, and repatriate all non-whites with their homelands. To someone living in reality, this plan sounded absolutely unrealistic, deranged and insane, but to the two founders of the ARA, it was the ultimate plan, something worth striving for, in order to live in a utopian society. Known as the Company, the ARA were responsible for robbing 22 banks, with these raids beginning in 1994. In total, the two founders were experts when it came to bank robberies, netting roughly $250,000. Many white gangs like bank robbery, because robbing from a bank nets quick federally insured cash. Organizations like these despise the federal government, and like to stick it to them in any way possible. Essentially, the idea to rob banks was really to fund a race war, and give a bounty to other racist groups. With the influx of money, the gang could possess more power, and plan out assassinations of key figures in both government and other prominent groups. One such assassination was carried out by an associate of the gang, which I'll get onto shortly. Before we get onto some of the crimes committed by the organization, it is worth hearing about the two men that brought everything together. Peter Kevin Langan, aka Commander Pedro, was one of ARA's founders. Described as manipulative, conniving and intelligent, Langan's mugshot does him no justice. They say looks can be deceiving, and in his case, they sure were. Although he looked disheveled and somewhat of a hillbilly, Langan was well educated and fluent in French and Vietnamese. He came from a military background, and was born in Saigon, Vietnam. His father was a CIA agent during the Vietnam War, and a young Peter Langan looked up to, and idolized his father. The Langan family relocated to Washington, D.C. in 1964. Everything was going well for the first 3 years, until the patriarch of the family suddenly died in 1967. This event sent a 9-year-old Langan off the rails, and in 1974, he was sentenced to 5 years in the Florida Department of Corrections on a robbery charge. This was the 1970s, and being young and white in the FDC wasn't ideal. YouTuber 1090 Jake has spoken on the treatment of white inmates within the system, and he was incarcerated around 2012. Given his accounts on the lack of power held by many white inmates during his time inside, I highly doubt that Langan was thriving within the prison environment decades earlier, with the prison mostly consisting of a black and Latino inmate population. Perhaps it was repeated abuse suffered within the FDC that caused him to adopt a racist, anti-black worldview, because he came out with long hair, long nails, and an even worse attitude than before. To his credit, he tried to go legit, but despite having a wife and fathering a son, he couldn't stick to the regular route and fell back into crime. It has been said that Langan knew Richard Wild Bill Guthrie, aka Commander Pavel, from Wheaton High School in Maryland. However, some sources claim that the pair met shortly after Langan's first prison stint. Whatever the real answer, the pair bonded over shared experiences and interests. Wild Bill was a loner who hated the government, and he was described as a very bitter man. In the 1980s, he was in the U.S. Navy and had tried to join the SEALs. He was denied, and drew a swastika on the wall. To everyone who knew him, Wild Bill was an outsider, a man on the fringes, who like Langan, frequented a number of different states. From an early age, Wild Bill knew how to forge IDs and commit document fraud, as his parents owned a printing shop. This would come in handy later on. Immersed in hate groups and Christian identity, which many white groups favor, Langan and Guthrie Jr. soon formed their own extremist group. They were a big fan of books such as the Turner Diaries and the Silent Brotherhood, with these books inspiring them in their schemes. The books helped them to construct a blueprint for a governmental takeover, but the pair also learned much from previous groups, who had tried and failed to seize power from the government. It should be noted that when compared to other white-based groups, the ARA was much more radical. In contrast to other groups, where members mostly joined for recreational reasons like partying, and primarily with the intent to live up to an image and receive attention from their peers, the ARA wasn't all fun and games. They had a mission, and even made a 2-hour recruitment video, sending it to radical groups scattered across the country. Ideally, they wanted to recruit people who believed in their political cause, and didn't want part-time partygoers. They wanted to overthrow the federal government, whom they referred to as ZOG, or the Zionist-occupied government. This belief is that Israel actually runs and controls America. For the scheme to come together, they needed like-minded men to help them achieve this. Given that this was a criminal organization, the pair were very selective when it came to recruiting members, and had the goal of building up an army. Langan was in charge of this venture, and recruits gained the trust of Langan and Guthrie Jr. by helping them commit crimes such as retail scams, and eventually, armed takeover robberies. Although the pair sometimes recruited members to accompany them on robberies, for the most part, they encouraged members to do crimes themselves. The idea behind this was to avoid the possibility of being informed on later on, but it also prevented the crimes being tied to the ARA organization. During different Christian Identity Church events, Langan networked and found recruits, but like Wild Bill, he was always wary of outsiders. One such associate of the organization was named Chevy Kehoe. It has been said that Kehoe was later given an assassination contract by the ARA, and was tasked with killing the Muller family in 1996. Like Kehoe, the Muller family had been residents of a Christian identity group called Elohim City. The compound, which is located in a rural community in Oklahoma, catered toward like-minded, white supremacist types. The compound was a place in which members of ARA were said to have trained for combat. The paramilitary training proved handy during bank robberies, as members stayed active and easily vaulted teller counters. Shockingly, it has been said that Timothy McVeigh, the man responsible for the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, took part in some of these bank robberies, which isn't a stretch given his connections to white supremacy and the far right. It has been revealed that McVeigh could have been working undercover for the U.S. Department of Defense, with the intent of gaining the trust and ultimately working toward infiltrating the ARA. The authenticity of this is still up for debate, but McVeigh did indeed make at least one phone call to the Elohim City compound, just prior to launching the attack that killed 168 people. Timothy McVeigh connections aside, let's now get back to Chevy Kehoe. The Muller family were no longer residents of the compound, but had overheard secret information that the ARA didn't want leaked. This regarded the 1995 Oklahoma City bombings, which many believed had been funded by the ARA. Kehoe and an accomplice robbed and killed the family, before later shooting it out with law enforcement. Kehoe later received 3 life sentences. An unrelated but interesting fact is that Kehoe was tied to now deceased serial killer Israel Keyes. Kehoe's younger brother grew up burglarizing homes with him in Washington state. During his killing spree, Keyes was responsible for takeover-style bank robberies, receiving an additional high having just murdered a victim. To kickstart their crime spree, Langan and Wild Bill decided that it would be a good idea to rob a Pizza Hut in Georgia. For $1,800, the crime certainly wasn't worth the risk, because Langan was apprehended. During the robbery, Guthrie Jr. managed to evade law enforcement and escape. However, police investigating the crime would piece together the events, and tied Guthrie Jr. to the crime through Langan. For whatever reason, the Secret Service had Langan freed from prison, and he had made some sort of deal with them. Langan was supposed to assist them in bringing down Wild Bill. This strategy didn't work because the pair were still close. Still, the Secret Service had learned that Guthrie Jr. hated the government, and had conspired to kill the then President of the United States, George Bush. In spite of this intelligence, Guthrie Jr. was elusive, and remained uncaged. When Langan finally met up with him on the street, and told him about the intelligence agencies being after him, the pair made a pact to continue operating in criminal activity, and to never be taken in alive. Essentially, the investigation into Guthrie Jr. simply emboldened him and Langan. They were going to go all out. It should be said that Langan enjoyed making bombs, hoarding ammunition, and providing the logistics for the ARA. He bought and maintained rented safe houses, in Kansas and Columbus. These safe houses contained survivalist gear, and all manner of firepower. Meanwhile, Guthrie Jr. created fake identities, sometimes imprinting details that made them appear as though they were law enforcement issued. This tactic came in handy when it came to registering bank robbery getaway cars in synthetic identities. Moreover, the gang wore police jackets fitted with ATF or FBI lettering when committing bank robberies. One event changed the course of history for all organizations that were anti-government. The siege at Waco angered many who were part of groups such as the ARA. The fact that law enforcement agencies could arrive and physically overpower, kill people and destroy property, seizing firearms in the process, was terrifying for many. It further confirmed the belief that the federal government would impose their tyrannical reign on people who posed a threat to them. Therefore, the ARA took note and further armed themselves. Peter Langan and Guthrie Jr. burst into the Society National Bank, armed and wearing president masks, these being Nixon and Reagan. The pair forced tellers to the ground, whilst timing the takeover robbery. Langan vaulted over the counter, chucking notes into a hold-all bag. In just 2 minutes, the pair rushed out the door with $11,890, before proceeding to drive away at high speed. Unfortunately for the two ARA commanders, A dye pack inside the loot bag exploded during their escape. $9,000 worth of notes were now permanently stained and rendered useless. Furious, the pair threw this cash out of the window, holding on to the rest, some of which was partly damaged. Since Guthrie Jr. knew how to craft and forge documents, he was tasked with repairing this partially damaged cash. For the pair, every amount was worth something, because this cash was going to fund purchases of firearms, equipment and their American dream. The bank robberies began racking up, with the pair staking out banks in different states, selecting ones close to highways, months, and sometimes years in advance, before robbing them. Langan even pretended to be Hispanic during the robberies, with this idea coming from the book previously mentioned titled The Silent Brotherhood. Furthermore, the pair planted real bombs at banks to delay law enforcement chases. The strategies employed continued to work time and time again, and the cash built up, with some of this cash being sent to neo-Nazi groups, along with being used to purchase supplies for future robberies. The cockiness of the pair triggered the federal law enforcement organizations. The Midwestern Bank Bandits, as they were referred to as, mocked them by sending them taunting letters, joking and laughing at them. By playing this game, the ARA became a major target for the government. Wearing hard hats and camouflage jackets, Langan and Guthrie Jr. took over a bank. Even with everything going according to plan, something always goes bad. When Langan's face mask slipped down, it blocked his vision. He ditched his disguise, leaving it on the teller counter. In a time before widespread bank surveillance cameras, this move still could have enabled the pair to remain aloof. However, a teller remembered Langan's distinct appearance from this mistake, with this later coming back to haunt him. When roughly 50 police responded to the robbery, they found a planted bomb but successfully managed to defuse it. For this robbery, the pair only stole $3,400. The FBI were contacted by an ARA member who knew about some of the robberies, and had met the two commanders of the ARA. He had grown disillusioned with the gang, and didn't believe that the leaders could successfully overthrow the federal government. This man became an informant for law enforcement, who were already working the case of the Midwestern Bank Bandits, with them soon learning that the culprits were in fact the two ARA founders. The ARA member had intimate knowledge of some of the bank robberies because he'd been involved in the planning stages, and had been paid $200 for helping the pair out. This member had been contacted earlier by law enforcement due to the fact that he had been using dye-stained money. This $200 came from the June 1994 takeover robbery. Working with reliable informant information, FBI agents followed the member to meet Wild Bill. Always on alert, Wild Bill noticed the tailing, and sped away. He was later caught within a suburban community. Having decided not to shoot it out, Wild Bill came in peacefully. Whilst sat in lockup, the pressure must have gotten to him, as he soon began informing on his former partner, and his own group. Guthrie Jr. told police about the bank robberies that the pair had committed, along with a safe house location in which Langan was likely hauled up in. In just a short space of time, the gang's founder had told all, and the loyalty and brotherhood that the gang preached was scrubbed away. With new intelligence, law enforcement monitored a safe house in which Langan was laying low. A SWAT team surrounded Langan's rental property, and knew what to expect. Langan was armed and extremely dangerous. When Langan was spotted getting into a van, law enforcement made their move. Langan became spooked, and jumped into the back of the van. He grabbed a pistol, clutching onto it with both hands, whilst aiming it at officers. Police lit the van up, firing into the van over 50 times. When the gunsmoke cleared, everyone believed that Langan was gone. Somehow, Langan made it out alive. Instead of taking himself out, Langan willingly surrendered. Upon searching the safe house, the evidence was overwhelming. With bomb-making materials, dye-stained gloves, and a heap of weaponry with items like grenades. Langan was destined to spend life in prison, and the quest to take over the government was over. Having already been informed on, something bizarre was soon to be learned by law enforcement. As it turned out, Langan was going to be well equipped to handle the prison environment. He had been leading a secret life whilst running the ARA, being that he was a crossdresser named Donna. Prosecutors didn't buy this, and it was a terrible look for the gang. Wild Bill had already snitched, but before being set to testify against his former friend, he committed suicide in his cell. His snitch jacket was also a terrible look, and the disgraceful feelings must have got to his psyche. Still, even with Guthrie Jr. now out of the picture, the evidence against Langan was plentiful. After a 22-day trial involving over 60 witnesses, he would be found guilty of robbing 2 banks, being sentenced to life plus 35 years. Moreover, to add insult to injury, he has been made to pay restitution. This amount being $6,270, along with a $400 fine. Behind bars, Langan tried to petition for surgery, in order to remove his man parts. He claims to be a female trapped inside a man's body. Now, the ARA's downfall was swift, rapid, and happened overnight. It was an organization that had big plans, but never managed to make them come into fruition. We can all learn a lot from this story, with one of the lessons being that hate never wins. Joining any violent criminal organization is a surefire way to get yourself jammed up for decades. Everyone will tell once they are threatened with football numbers, and the cause that you initially believed in will crumble with your soul and spirit once locked behind bars. Langan and Guthrie Jr. could have dedicated their time toward building or creating something. Instead, they built up an organization built on lies, hate and deceit.